All right, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Game Changer Show. I'm your host, Mike McKay, based in the Jacksonville, Florida market. If anyone is in the Jacksonville, Florida market or thinking about getting into it, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to help. And we are still a very active buyer here in Jacksonville. So if you have deals, we're happy to buy those as well. Each and every Friday, we do this show live with people who are changing the game of real estate all over the country. And this is a live show. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments for our guests to answer. And this week on the show, from up in Camden, New Jersey, we have Jonathan Gabay. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. So for people who don't know you, can you maybe just give a 2-minute background of how you got started in the real estate business and how that kind of led you to where you are today?
Sure. So, right out of college, I was always interested in investment, passive income, and things like that. So, I was always the handy person that knew construction, but real estate is more so the business side of things. So, I went to college with an engineering degree in civil engineering construction management, and I was always on these construction sites, and I'm like, why not do something for myself on a smaller scale and try to get started? So I found a couple investment properties at the time I was at Rutgers University.
Oh,
Rutgers
nice.
Camden had some uh, investment opportunities at that time. So I just dabbled a little bit and tried to get my feet wet with some investment properties and haven't stopped since.
Gotcha. So when you said we were getting your feet wet initially, like were you looking to kind of buy rentals at that time, or how did you kind of get started?
So I had growing up, I always had the interest in like HGTV, flipping, stuff like that. But they showed you like the sexy side of real estate, like flipping and doing kitchens and bathrooms. I learned the hard way by getting my feet wet real early that it's not all what it seems. It's the inspections, it's the certificate of occupancy. So I wanted to get into a price point where I felt comfortable that that learning curve was not going to crush me. So I actually went into a small rental grade property as my first property. It was a Section 8 rental. The occupant was there for a couple years. It was more so just cosmetically getting it up to par and learning the inspections process. That was like my little lesson to myself to learn the inspections and the legalities of having a rental before I actually jumped in and did something else.
Got it. And that's for people who don't know, that's the inspections that you have to do to get approved for Section 8, or
So anytime, at least in my market, when you have to trade properties, you basically need a certificate of occupancy. And that
hmm,
checks the fire, safety, the plumbing, the electrical, the building. And then once you get that CO, which means the property is habitable, there's realistically within my town, for instance, there's a rental approval. So the city needs to now come out and certify that it's approved. And then they have their own standards. And then
huh,
Section 8 has their own. So by the time I actually even have a tenant in place, there's about 5 or 6 inspections.
wow, okay, a lot different than down here in Jacksonville. So how long does that process take to get all those inspections done?
So, given the fact that I've been doing it, now that the learning curve is over, I could get most of these in and out within a few days. But in the beginning, I mean, you have to know what these inspectors are looking for. And every time there is some sort of change in their inspection criteria, you pretty much need to know what's going on. So a lot of times I'll get caught off guard by something that they're now re-inspecting, and they're being more and more
Mhm.
stringent as time's gone on.
Got it. So you started with that kind of rental grade property that already had a tenant in there, maybe needed some cosmetic renovation. And then from there, now you kind of do really heavily distressed stuff, which is a whole animal on itself. So or I guess why did you decide to make that transition to the heavily distressed stuff?
So basically, the barrier to entry in real estate in a when someone's first starting out is realistically what their investment tolerance is. And what I was learning was I could get better deals on distressed property versus
Mhm.
buying something that's basically rent ready or essentially something that's minorly cosmetic. I'd rather go in and change the mechanicals and change the plumbing and electric, because on a rental, stabilizing it is one thing, but then managing it is another. And I like to leave my units very management light. Most of
Mm-hmm.
my problems are leaks, most of my problems are electrical issues, and I go into these houses that were built like 80 to 100 years ago. So they don't have the proper electric circuitry, it's more knob and tube, or they would have some plumbing issues, old cast iron. So we like to rip these out anyway. So I'd rather go with a distressed product to begin with, and by default change all the mechanical, all the electrical, all the plumbing, so that by the time I get tenants in there, I know that it's going to be a solid rental that's going to be management light for me in perpetuity. Versus if I just want to patch and paint something, whatever's behind the walls might be a little more difficult to, I guess, repair and fix while it's occupied. And the worst part about it is property management is a very unforgiving profession. No one calls me and says, thank you for collecting rent. No one calls me to say, thank you. It's more, my ceiling's leaking, this is leaking, please fix it right now. Like, there could be a downpour and they're gonna be like, my roof is leaking, you need to send someone immediately. And liability wise, you can't really send people out in the rain, it has to dry off. So it's a very unforgiving profession in general. And I just wanna make sure that I have the best ability to have a management light portfolio as possible. And if that's buying distressed at a better price point and spending more upfront in the construction, it's actually better for me in the long term.
Got it. So you prefer to go in there, really redo everything so that you know exactly what it is and that it's going to be a long-term, long-term easy to manage because all the hard stuff's been done up front.
Correct. So, like, for example, I like to pick the finishes. I also buy materials in bulk at this point. So, a lot of times people will go, and let me give you a baseline example. Most landlords or most property investors go for like the cheapest materials. Problem is, all my units have, if not the original wood floors, we do like vinyl plank, because the turnover of the unit is where we actually lose the money. It's not on the rent increases that we're losing on pro forma. If it's rented for $1,200 a month, but I could get $1,250, by removing that tenant for that extra 50 to $100 might cost me more than it's worth. So we actually want to make our turnovers very low cost as well. We want to use robust materials. So I'd rather go in and do it myself and have the same materials across a lot of my units to really make it easier for us to manage and turn over.
Mhm. And then, like, are there certain examples of materials that you choose to always use because that they last a long amount of time, or?
So specifically on flooring, which takes the biggest wear, if I could sand the original wood floors, I will do it, no matter what the cost. If not, I
Mhm.
will do vinyl plank, because that is the most waterproof and it stands the test of time with tenancy. Another thing is I always do granite countertops. I don't do Formica, because anything MDF, which is like particle board,
Mhm.
tends to, it doesn't stand well in especially rental applications, even the cabinets. I want to use solid wood, because when in your house, there's a difference between a house and a home. A home is something that you're emotionally connected to, you take care of. A lot of these rental properties are treated like houses and not like homes, where like it's just four walls and whatever they could stick in the cabinets. So we try to make it as robust as possible. If I can make it solid wood cabinets where I know they won't get messed up, they're not going to be, it's basically no water damage, stuff like that. So we make sure to use solid cabinetry, solid countertops. And in the bathrooms, we always tile the floors. And we basically make sure that when we do it, we do hardy backer as well, because any wet surfaces in a rental property is going to take the biggest beating, especially right when you walk in a house. If you put carpet, chances are when you wipe your feet right when you walk in, you're going to constantly need to change that. Or if it's going to be low grade laminate flooring, you might have that same issue. So on the flooring and any wet surfaces, we tend to put the most emphasis on that's our biggest capital expenditure in a rental unit. It's not the walls, it's not the finishes, it's not the light fixtures, it's really those wet surfaces and the hard contact surfaces.
Mhm. Gotcha. And then, you guys, I think you said you manage all of your construction in-house.
Yes.
At what point did you decide to build that out versus, what you were doing previously?
So in the beginning, it would be it's the hardest part of this starting out is finding a good crew of construction people. I got to be honest, I've been doing this for years and it's still very tough. Um, but when I find a crew that's very good, I treat them well so that they treat me well, and we just continue growing together. So there's some crews I've kept busy almost exclusively for the past 5 years. And the more exposure I have in these construction projects, the better it is where I learn what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then I could pretty much divide the crews as like I have a good flooring guy, I have a good roofer at this point. And it's not like I give one person everything. A lot of them, yes, are independent contractors. We have maintenance in-house, but I need to basically shift my guys on a job site as see fit. So sometimes I'll take them off and move them to another job because I need to do rewires before I move any tenants in and close up walls. So there's a lot of construction logistics, and most of my time and effort is on the stabilization more than the management. We really emphasize the construction up front, making it a solid rental, and then from there, that's when we just start handling the management in-house, where we have someone who's full-time.
Got it. So how do you manage? I mean, that's if you got a lot of projects going on at once and, different contractors that you're managing. I mean, how are you keeping all that organized?
So we use something called Builder Trend. We also use Appfolio. So we basically have a checks and balances. And for people that aren't familiar with Builder Trend, it's something where you could pretty much check in on a job site in real time. We could see what's ordered. Also, Home Depot and other people basically poured into it as well. So it's a very useful tool for us, but not to mention, I like the construction management side of things. By default, I'm basically, I did civil engineering with a construction management background. So I know the optimizations of a job site. I was also very handy growing up. So to some degree, I enjoy the construction aspect of it, and that's why I spend most of my days on the job site. I'm not really in the office. I'm more so on the job, trying to optimize things. If they need things, I'll try to arrange people. It's really the construction logistics side where I manage most of my time.
Yeah. And how many projects are you guys running at a given time?
It varies. Right now in the summer, we're really trying to push for getting all our projects down because it's very seasonal here in a sense. Between I want to say November and almost March, you can't really do exterior work like foundation stuff like that. So
Mhm.
in this winter time, I might have anywhere from like 6 to 8 projects. Right now, we're running at 12 projects, and we run it very tight knit as it is. So I, in theory, could do bigger projects and more projects, but it would honestly, I feel like things would slip through the cracks. So anything more than 12 projects for us is a lot. And I'd
Right.
rather keep it I like to be on top of things and see how it works. And I like to be there for all the inspections. So anything more than that would really be wearing me thin.
Gotcha. And then you talked a little bit before about optimizing the kind of the construction site or processes. Like, can you give a couple examples for people who maybe have no idea how to do that?
Sure. So, for instance, Home Depot is one of my top sources for supplies like when I need them.
Hmm.
Problem is, a lot of times when I move someone to go to the Home Depot, what they need can take them an hour from the job site. So there's
Mm.
something with a pro. You can actually get a pro VIP like associate from the store, and Home Depot comes to you, which is so what we have is a pro extra account. And if I need big materials, sheetrock, stuff like that, Home Depot they have their own concierge for people that are active construction field. What they'll do is they'll deliver it straight to the job site. So I try to not take my
Mm.
guys to Home Depot. I'd rather them tell me, what do you need? And we basically would have all the materials that they need for that week delivered at the beginning of the week so that I could try to keep them on the job site. Because where I lose time is where two people need to run off the job site to grab something. the more time you could spend on the job site and the less time sourcing materials is actually the best case scenario for optimizing labor and time, because some of these people are by the hour, some people are by the day. So you really want to make sure that you're using them for like their highest and best use, but also you also don't want to waste time sending 3 people to Home Depot when for $20 they'll deliver it to my job site and not even need to worry about it.
Yeah. No, that's a good example. Do you also get you said you buy a lot of stuff in bulk. Is that also through Home Depot, or you just use other providers for stuff like flooring or
I
countertops?
use, yeah, so it really depends. I don't have a go-to like supply house. If there's something that I see in bulk, like flooring, there's a couple pallets of flooring that I can get and it fits my criteria of vinyl plank. And I like to get a thicker wear layer because, like I said, with the flooring, I'm really keen on the amount of wear and tear. And I'd rather spend the money up front to make sure it doesn't get worn out and replaced. If I see a special, I'll buy all they have. So if it's 10,000 square feet, 10 pallets, 20 pallets, and we'll store them. And as we need it, I'll tell my guys to go to our storage and pick it up, and we just put them on the job site as needed.
Yeah. For people who don't know what a thicker wear layer is, can you just kind of explain what that is?
Sure. So when it comes to flooring, there's different grades of flooring. And specifically when it comes to vinyl plank, which is that waterproof style flooring, you could put it in just like click it. It basically locks into place tongue and groove. But the wear layer is the top layer that's resistant to scratching. And
Mm,
when you have rental properties, you have a lot of movement and furniture being dragged on the floor, you want a thicker wear layer. Like it might be a couple dollars more for a pallet, but it makes sense because then you don't have scratches in the middle of your floor when they're basically moving furniture across the unit. And it goes back into our core principle of trying to make these very management light. I'd rather spend the
mhm.
money up front making sure that these are durable materials. And the thicker the wear layer, the more durable that top layer, that like coating of the style, color, and sheen of the floor will remain.
Gotcha. And then, besides like just like not having the guys leave the job site, which I think is a really good point, what else do you kind of see as like an area where people really screw up in optimizing their construction operations?
I oftentimes see, so mind you, my basis of operation is mainly rental grade. So
Mhm.
we basically do rental properties. So I can't tell you on a flipping side, most people might spend more money in kitchen and bathrooms, where I might spend it more on mechanicals. But I think sometimes over improving a property is not in the best benefit of management or resale. So we do sell some property. Mainly we rent, but sometimes there's a opportunistic situation, or we also find owner occupants that want to basically, we convert a lot of our renters into homeowners. And sometimes, let's say we're looking for an appraised value. Adding a half bath sometimes adds appraised value, but what really adds value is an extra bedroom. If we can carve out a bedroom somewhere in the house, that is where we actually get more bang for our buck.
Mm,
So even on rental, even on, so sometimes I'll see people remove things to make rooms bigger, but when you think about it on an appraised value, or you think of it on an a rentability, it doesn't really work out the way it should be. Like there, sometimes they'll over improve a bathroom, or they'll put mechanicals that don't really make sense. Like in a rental, if you provide it, technically you need to warranty it. So if you put, for instance, in a rental a dishwasher, that's you basically put it in there, you own it. So on these low-income housings, or let's say some of these rental properties, if you provide it, you continually need to maintain it. So a lot of times we won't include a dishwasher or a washer and dryer. We'll give them just the hookups. So a lot of times I'll see someone have a washer and dryer in the unit rather than just the hookups. And they just need to remember that if you provide it, you're also going to need to warranty it. And I work in a very small subset of housing where we have HUD requirements to provide necessities of housing. And in the state of New Jersey, HUD compliance is you need to have heat, you need to have
mhm.
a cooking surface, you need to have a refrigerator, you need certain things. So some people might over improve their rentals and just know that they're not really getting more bang for their buck for it. Where I'll fix up something with granite countertops, there could be a competitive unit right next door that's not as improved. They're not going to get any more money for it because it's a very price sensitive market. I do it because I take it distressed. So if I'm going to be building it anyway, I'm going to be putting in that granite. But I wouldn't be ripping out certain countertops for other countertops in the hopes of receiving more rent. Because at the end of the day, you just want durability and stability in a unit.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then you kind of mentioned you're in this niche area of kind of lower income housing, and obviously there's a lot of nuances that come along with that. Maybe they're even specific to your area, but can you share maybe some of those nuances for people thinking about getting into low income housing?
Sure. So affordable housing in general there's an absolute need no matter where you are, because there's always a need for affordable housing. The difference is, let's say, for instance, my subset of Camden, New Jersey, there's a lot of quote unquote slumlords. And slumlords just care about the money coming in and not the management side of things. So oftentimes these areas have mismanagement from landlords because they don't have best in class management. When you have a few units, it's almost, you think that it's going to be a passive income producing portfolio, whereas low income housing is relatively more active than you think. So you have annual inspections. I'll give you an example. I have a tenant where we're collecting $1,200 a month. That should be on pro forma $14,000 a year. But when they have their annual inspections and we have to do 6,000 worth of repairs, we can say that the tenant caused that problem. We can arbitrate that in court, realistically. But because it's not HUD compliant, the subsidy will stop. We won't receive that rent. So it's almost a catch-22. We're out that money regardless. Like, we either need to fix it and be in compliance within 30 days, or we try to arbitrate it, which during COVID, there was no sort of remediation. We were pretty much at an impasse. So for a year or two, we could get away with not having any sort of income coming in, but we still have to provide heat, we still have to provide water. There's certain things as a landlord you need to provide regardless of if you're collecting rent or not. And so COVID was a very tough time for us and landlords in my sector as well, because we're providing a necessary housing, understanding that they're on a fixed income or below the means of a normal, they're subsidized. So for us to now have this no recourse, like as a landlord, the only recourse you have for non-payment is an eviction, or you have some sort of court moderation. And during COVID, that sort of changed. There was none of that. So we had to absorb the cost. And there's a lot of, the little landlords went bust. And then the bigger ones pretty much bought out the smaller guys. So there needs to be a level of understanding that rent, yes, sounds good. Pro forma, you would think you're buying on a cap rate. Let's say you're buying on a percentage of return. Just know that your percentage of return on low income housing may seem big on a financial scale, but your operations of managing your units is very tough.
Hmm. And what did you guys put any strategies in place during COVID to try to mitigate that at all?
We did try. So there were grants available to these
Hmm.
tenants, and we were helping them apply. We basically had like a liaison in our office, help them apply for grants. We gave a lot of people, I want to say forbearance, but I don't. Forbearance is the wrong word. It was more like pay what you can right now, and we'll try to help you on the back end.
Hmm.
There was a lot of COVID assistance, but you have to understand, in our market, it's more or less if they think the help is coming, it might just there was a lapse in time where funds were no longer available in these grants, but it was never mentioned. So it
Hmm.
was more of a waiting game. We were waiting to hear if they were approved. Tenants were waiting to hear if they were approved, and like this limbo was not beneficial for any party.
Yeah.
So during COVID, we really tried to work with our tenants as much as possible just to cover our baseline expenses. Like if we had debt service or some sort of utility allotment, certain things we still had to pay our bills. as a property management company, we still had overhead. We still had a lot of stuff we needed to cover, regardless of if our rent was being collected or not. So
Hmm.
we needed to work with tenants. I mean, you have to understand, we already know they're down on their luck during COVID, and we needed to find a way to be the helping hand, but still hold ourselves accountable for our responsibilities.
Hmm. And have you always managed yourself, or did you switch over to self-management at a certain point for a specific reason?
We've always been vertically integrated. Since the onset, we built, managed everything in house. And sort of management it caught us by surprise because you have to
Hmm.
think at a scale of where we have been over the past 8, 9 years. After we build them, it's more of like that mentality of set it and forget it. The property's done, but then you have these turnovers. You have tenants that don't pay. You have tenancies that go sour and you need to replace a roof and do ongoing maintenance. So after all these years, it sort of creeped up on us. And now we, by default, turned into a management company. And a property management company, you have to understand, when you third party a property management company, you're not just paying them to collect your rent. You're paying them when problems happen, when there's a sink leak. As a principal owner, I don't like sink leaks. I don't want a roof leak. Property management companies that are third party love it because they could charge you for it. So, oh, there's a sink leak, they charge you for the labor plus materials, and they make a whole procedure out of it. Where I'm an owner, I don't want this leak, we're trying to solve it as fast as possible. So it took us, you have to understand, when you have these rental units that are very demanding, you almost have to get to scale to make it worth your while to hold management in house. Because if you don't have enough units, you're sitting by the sideline. And when you have too many units, it's almost arguably not worth it to give it to a third party management company. So it took us a couple of years to get to scale to really make it worth our while to manage in house.
Got it. How many units are you guys at today?
Today, we manage 130 units total.
And is it all your own, or do you manage for external people as well?
So we don't manage external, it's all for our group that's internal.
Got it. And
So we don't do third party
um,
management, which is, in essence, that's a shortfall on low income housing in general, or let's even put it as rental properties go. Property management in our area is scarce for the sheer fact that it's such a demanding market in general.
mhm,
That you need to be vertically integrated to really have a good basis there.
yeah. And to get up to these 130 units, I mean, I'm sure you've had different acquisition strategies over the years, but what does your acquisition strategy look like in the last, call it 24 months?
A lot of our properties that we recently acquired was like tax lien foreclosure. We even bought from, so basically to go into the gist of tax lien foreclosure, it's a very niche acquisition strategy. It's basically unpaid property taxes that get sold off by the municipality.
Hmm.
And what we'll do is we cannot compete on the primary market. I mean, it's just very competitive. But we've created buying relationships from companies that buy these tax liens, or we'll try to purchase them ourselves. And from there, once, let's put it like this, after 2 years, at least in the state of New Jersey, 2 years of
Hmm.
non-payment, you get lien status. After a year, you foreclose, you now get the rights to the property as a final judgment, which is the deed. So we
Hmm.
would buy from those kinds of companies. We would try to buy these properties from them. But they also come with a level of risk because you don't know the condition. You know that they're distressed because no one paid the taxes on them, which fit into my investment strategy because I knew those properties were already distressed as it was. These were basically abandoned properties. So in my market, there were abandoned properties. We tried to capitalize on the fact that they were distressed and abandoned, and that's why we wanted them. So we would basically work a deal with these companies, try to buy them from them, and from there they would make a premium and we would buy in at a price point that made sense for us.
And you would buy them before the company would foreclose you were buying them from, or you would buy
We would
them in
buy them
default?
not on the primary market. We would buy them once they were already foreclosed.
Got it. So would you have
But
access
you
to
have
them
to,
before? Or, yeah.
it's more, there's some, here's the thing, a lot of like local agents might have these relationships with um, REO companies, portfolio companies, servicing companies for tax liens. So in our specific area, like my word of advice would be to get in touch with an agent that is familiar with all these REOs or has connections, because it's good to be in that primary buying pool. Like for a lot of these properties we got were never really like, some of them from the MLS, but a lot of these were more so before they hit the market, they want to sell five at a time. You have to buy all five of them. You cannot buy four. You can't portfolio and divvy out. It was more of an all or nothing. And that's how we really got to scale. We would buy five at a time, four at a time, stuff like that.
Gotcha. And how have you structured your, I guess, your money side for acquisitions?
So I'm lucky that I have a big backing behind me. It's all internal. We don't really raise outside capital. It's more so our management group and everyone that works within us. We basically we don't pull money out. I was living very bootstrapped. We bootstrapped this entire business. Every profit we did was going back into acquiring more and more. So I have to be honest with you, the first few years were a little slow, but you have to understand when you're not really milking the business, you're trying to grow the business. It's more of like it's compounding. So at this point, we do have a couple mortgages, we do refinance here and there, but a lot of it is just trying to be as operational light and reinvesting as much of our income as possible.
Got it. So a lot of your properties, only some of them have mortgages.
We
You don't refinance.
refinance we raise capital internally, but we do syndicate partnerships, stuff like that. But we do not we're not fully leveraged in a sense that where a lot of people in my market fully leverage. They'll
Yeah.
basically fix it up, refinance. It's like the Burr model. I don't
Hmm.
particularly do the Burr model, which is buy, rehab, refinance, or rent, refinance. I don't really do that model. I've done it a couple times, but if I need capital and there's basically an opportunity to be had, I might sell a property to try to buy another three. Like once it's
Mm.
fully capitalized. But this is also, you have to understand the past 24 months, to go back to your previous question, the market's been crazy. So the price points I was buying at 2, 3, 4 years ago is completely different than today. So like today, I'd buy one property for the price I was buying three or four about 3 years ago before COVID. So this exponential ARV, you want to say, was unmaterialized 2, 3 years ago. Now I'll sell one and it'll finance probably three more buys.
Yeah. Gotcha. So you guys, yeah, so you kind of raise the money internally, but then you don't, you, or at least majority, you don't refinance.
We
You
don't,
just
we
kind
do
of leave
refinance, but
in
we do
the
not
deal.
leverage our
Like
entire equity.
got it. You're not pulling 75% out like a lot of people
We're
are
not
and then
pulling
trying to pull the extra
75%
into the
because
next one.
we're trying to, I don't want to be in a position where I'm collecting rent and running around and all this just to pay debt service. I do not want to, because once that snowball effect starts, it's not going to stop. I never want to be underwater on any property. We operate a little more conservative than a lot of our friendly competition, I want to say. We try to not over leverage. What's going to kill any sort of future momentum is over leveraging, in a sense that if I ever need to sell, I don't want to have to bring money to the table. My comps that are against my rental units are owner occupied properties. So when an owner
Mm.
occupant purchases, I'll just use rough numbers here. My unit in my head is worth 100. I'm in it 80. An owner occupant would probably pay 130, 140 for a unit comparable because it's less than renting it. So a lot of people might use that as the comp and say, I want to pull 75% LTV against 140, even though mine is rental grade. I don't know if it's truly worth 140. I don't want to
Mm.
be in a position where I'm over leveraged on any property or any deal. So we do pull leverage. We're just not fully leveraged.
Got it. Understood. And earlier you mentioned something. You said we convert a lot of our tenants to owners. Can you
Right.
elaborate more what you meant about that?
So what we'll do is we bought units, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, that at this point, some tenants have stayed there since the onset, and they're like, "Listen, we really want to we want to buy this house. We've been here for like 5 years at this point." And we'll try to work with them because some are subpar on their credit, stuff like that. So we have someone in our office that really tries to work with them to, I guess, give them the option to buy the house. Let's put you in a position where you can't even buy this house. And then we got to an agreeable price. It's not like we really hold the note. It's more like you have to understand in Camden, where it's 65% renters, it's nice to have home ownership. To have a stake on the block, to have a homeowner on the block is actually an asset to me as an investor too. It's further
Mm,
stabilizes the area. So when I can, I'd like to make some of my renters owner occupants because by default, it'll stabilize the area. More families are coming in, they're not so transient. It's a win win all around. So we try where in the beginning they're working on their credit, they cannot buy a house. We try to work with them and give them the payment history to stand behind them. Like, all right, now you're in a position where you proved yourself. You can now go and try to apply and get pre-approved for a mortgage. And if you want to buy this house, we'll try to give it to you at a comparable rate.
gotcha. So you're not kind of going into it initially like a rent to own thing. It's just kind of if they bring it up and then you kind of help them to get, to get
We're
what they
not
need to get going.
emotionally attached to any of the properties in a sense. So if it could be a win-win where they can purchase it, we can basically wipe our hands clean and make a little bit on the back end and leverage that into another deal, that would be perfect. So we're not really limiting our investment strategy to just rentals. It's more if we find an opportunity where, look, we can clear 5, 6 years of cash flow and we
Mhm.
can also help this person out become an owner, why not? I mean, it would, in theory, be a win-win. You're stabilizing the area, you're further adding stability in an area where I'm heavily concentrated. So when you have home ownership, it actually helps the area.
Mhm. And is that kind of your metric? If you decide to sell it, you're like, this is kind of 5 or 6 years of cash flow. Is that what you would look for? Or,
I have to be honest. It changes. It also, admittedly, sometimes we do run into liquidity issues because we are heavily invested in our projects. So if we're hitting a wall of liquidity and like we're like, oh, they did mention they want to buy it, we might revisit it. But that's me telling you complete honesty. Like I wish to
yeah.
tell you that we never really had liquidity issues, but sometimes your projects overrun. You don't know. There's unforeseen issues that come up, foundation issues. Permitting issues. So all of that comes into like stabilizing a property. And since we have so many of these projects going on, sometimes we need to, how you're saying how you fund all these projects and capital, sometimes we have to sell a unit just to make it.
Hmm. Got it. And you mentioned kind of like the housing stock, I think is around like 80, I think you said 80 to 100 years old. So I'm guessing that presents some unique challenges on the construction side.
It does, but the uniformity of the construction is what I like. So I work in row homes. There's no load
Hmm.
bearing walls. If you think of a row home, it's just like think of like a city street. And I want to explain this for people in the audience that might not understand. It's basically you have, and they're all brick. The newer ones are maybe made of wood, but the ones that I predominantly work on are brick firewalls. They have a facade in the back, and there's no load bearing walls in them. So for
Hmm.
us to do construction is relatively easy. I don't need to look into engineering to see what's load bearing, what's not. It makes it very easy for us to get in and get out of these projects. And there might be nuances on the plumbing or the mechanical, but in essence, because they're pretty uniform, there's not much that we cannot do at this point. After doing so many of these projects, we know that there might be a little thing here and a little thing there, but overall, they're pretty uniform.
Yeah. So a lot of the housing stock, was it just kind of all built in around the same years and they kind of just built it all that way? Is that why it happened or how did that
So
kind of,
Camden, New Jersey, in general, it's a port city where, in the turn of the century, like early 1900s, it was really in its prime. So a lot of the influx of housing happened in the late 1800s into the right around the Depression, I want to say.
mhm,
There was a nice influx of housing and I want to say residents that lived there. And then there was like that urban decay period where between, I want to say, the 60s through the 90s. It was just partially abandoned, mismanaged, whatever you want to call it. Um, and now you have investors trying to come in, and even homeowners, even the city officials. There's no reason why Camden, New Jersey should not be a haven. It's right on the water. It's right across from Philadelphia. It's in New Jersey, has transit. There's no reason why it should not be revitalized. By default, it's a port city. It's right on the water. It has accessibility to everywhere. It's just that now, I guess, after this urban decay, there's new young minds coming in. There's a lot of the active investors right now are hungry. They're not comfortable. They would rather try to make value out of something that has no value.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of people, I remember one of the deals that I first worked on, they're like, the guy goes, you're willing to like bottom feed. Like, you're willing to take the one without a lot of money. If you're going to build a house, why are you building it in Camden? Why don't you build it in Haddonfield where it's going to be worth 10x? And I have to be honest, I sort of disagree with him. I mean, yes, in a flipping play, that would be nice, but I'm going to learn the same about construction. I'm going to learn the same about putting a project together in a $50,000 house or a $500,000 house.
Hmm.
Construction's the same. The inspections are relatively the same. I was coming in a position where I was not taught. I didn't have a mentor. If I could do this again, it probably would make sense to like understand it a little more than just watching it on TV and thinking I could do it myself. It's like you have to understand that like living through a construction project from start to finish has its nuances and its learning curve. And I was going to learn it on a number that I felt comfortable with and not overextend and then need to like ask every cousin to bail me out and every friend I knew. I wanted to be comfortable with it, and that's why I started in a low price point. And if that was me picking the low hanging fruit, so be it.
Yeah. And then kind of back to the construction side, because that is one of your areas of expertise, right? Like, do you have I'm sure you've had some crews for a while, right? But you probably have to find new people from time to time. Like, what's your process to do that, to know like, hey, these guys are solid. Like, how do you find them, and how do you kind of vet them, I guess, is my question.
So a lot of times I already have crews working on a job site. I'll try to bring them in tandem with a crew that's already working for me and have my crew, ones that I already know are working with me. And a lot of times you don't want to bring people into a job site. Too many people into a job site is not, I got to be honest, is not beneficial for the job site. But in the vetting criteria, it would be nice, like, hey, look, for 2 days, I want you to work alongside my head foreman, see how you work. And or what we'll do is we'll give them smaller projects. I'm like, all right, first we want you to do a basic turnover. Then we want you to
Mm,
do a base, like a little more involved of a project. And we try to scale up the scope of work. So we give them a very targeted scope of work. We're saying, all right, now we just want you to do basic turnover. We want to start you on a little something bigger, and then full rehab we'll eventually get into if we see that they could do all these little things before.
yeah. So kind of start small and to see if they can handle it with a little less risk.
Exactly, but also for the fact that at this point we know what we're doing, where like we could
Yeah.
sort of see throughout the process, like if they're doing something right or wrong. And anyone who says I could do this, I could do this, I could. Anyone who's a full yes man says they could do everything, you got to be careful from. Because if they're
Sure.
saying yes, they're just trying to please you, trying to get the job, and you got to be careful from that. Like if there's someone who
Yeah.
says, I do finishing carpentry work very good, but I'm not an electrician. Perfect. I know I could use him for that. There's some people that say I could do everything internal, but exterior work and roofing, I don't know very well. I would rather know what they don't know and
Mm,
put them in a position to succeed in what they do know rather than give them a whole job and let them give me a whole scope of work and say, A to Z, you got this, and then I got to pick up the pieces.
yeah, that's a good point. And then do you have like project managers, or is it really just you kind of keeping an eye on all these projects?
My main job is project management. I love
Okay.
the construction. I know it through and through. I've done so much of it that I'm the one who handles the construction management, the project management.
Got it. And then What's your kind of vision for you and your company over the next couple years? Like, where are you really looking to go?
I would like to get into bigger projects. We've done scattered residential. We've done low occupancy. When I say multifamily, I want to say like 4 units and below. I'd like to get into
Hmm.
something a little more substantive, something more of like maybe like a 10 to 20 unit, something where we can really have like an apartment garden style or just like a high occupancy building with multiple units. Right now we've had duplexes, triplexes, quads. It would be nice
Hmm.
to do something of bigger scale, and I know my market very well. I would even not be opposed to doing it in the Camden market I'm in right now. It's just also having concentration of units like that in one building does pose its challenges, but I think it would be nice to do something of higher scale.
Yeah. What what challenges do you think you'd face there versus kind of what you face with the single family or small multifamily?
So single family, I have to be honest, you can control the front door, you can control the back door and the yard. When you have multifamily with shared common spaces, there could be like its own operational challenges, cleaning challenges,
Mm,
quiet enjoyment where, oh, there's banging on the doors in the hallway. Like, I like the fact that I can control on single family, like who comes in and out of these properties. On a multi unit, when you have common spaces and um, shared access, someone leaves the door open, someone might get upset. It makes it operationally challenging, not necessarily construction challenging.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And we're kind of getting to the end here, but there's always two questions that I like to ask at
Sure.
the end. The first one's a little fun, which is, what is the craziest or most uncomfortable situation that you've ever experienced in a real estate deal?
A couple years ago, I bought a house sight unseen, and finally we were able to get into the property. And I want to say these squatters ran like an entire entrepreneurship operation out of there. One room, it was a three-bedroom house. Someone had a tattoo parlor in the living room, and then they had like, it clearly was an illegal operation. They were like squatting, and another person was doing haircuts out of the bedrooms. So we ended up having to do a sheriff lockout. We did an ejectment. It wasn't an eviction. So an eviction is when you have a landlord-tenant matter. Ejectment is more of like unknown occupants with no
Mhm.
lease in place. We did an ejectment, and when we did the lockout with the sheriff, he's like, "I haven't seen something like this in a while." So that was interesting. That was a fun story to go home and tell everyone we literally had a barber shop and a tattoo parlor out of one of the houses we just acquired. It was interesting.
Yeah. And you know, if the sheriff says he hasn't seen something like that in a while, that it was pretty unique situation. I'm sure he'll
That
see
was
the money.
very unique. I got to be honest. To come into like literally a tattoo parlor in a house is interesting.
Yeah. Awesome. The second question I always ask for kind of the newer people who are tuning into the show, which is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, knowing what you know now, when you were looking for your first deal, what would you tell yourself?
If I was looking for my first deal again, I would probably, I was too calculated in looking at the number. By the time I was able to find a deal that made sense, the deal was no longer there. By the
Mm,
time I was trying to find a deal, I want to do my due diligence on a baseline, but I don't want to look at it just on that property. I want to look at an area of interest for that I see fit, and you need to attack a deal when it comes. And the crazy ones are the ones that get the deal. The over calculated, let me run the numbers, let me show this to my friend and get their opinion. The deal's gone at that point. There's sharks that are hunting for these deals. So if there is a number in my head that I could do over again, I would be a little more eager to jump into the first deal and not be worried about getting my feet wet. Because I know if I'm getting my feet wet, it's a learning curve. And I have to be comfortable with that learning curve. So my piece of advice to anyone is find out your strengths and weaknesses on what your tolerances are in your first project. If money's the scary part for you, go into a lower number. If the learning, the uncertainty is a little more wearing for you than the money, I would go into something a little more ready. So if I could do this again, I know my strengths are construction. I wouldn't overpay because something looked good. I would probably go into something that needed a little more work because I truly want to learn it. I want to learn the processes of electric. I want to learn the processes of plumbing. I only started learning this about the fourth or fifth deal in because I was buying things that basically I bought other people's rental properties. I bought their problems. No one was going to me and saying, look, I collected so much money on this rental. I want you to have it now. It was more of like, they were a headache. They were a headache property. So if I could do this again, I wouldn't buy someone else's headache. I would break my head learning the craft rather than trying to perfect what someone else failed at.
Cool. A great piece of advice. I like it. If people want to reach out to you after the show, whether they have questions for you or maybe they may have some deals in the Camden area, how can they go about doing that?
You could either follow me on Instagram at Camden for Rent, or you could shoot me an email at jonathan@camdenforrent.com.
And it's a four. Is a four in there, right? Just so
Yeah,
people
so
know
it's
where.
Jonathan, Jonathan, at Camden 4, which is the number 4, rent.com. I'm always in the market to buy. Add me on any buyer's list or any leads you have. I'll gladly look into them.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, thanks for being on the show. This was great.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.